Hey there! In this video, I'll be drawing this little squirrel. And just as before, the main reason I chose this reference was that it made me smile. Look how cute it is. I also love the movement and the rhythm of the reference, so I'll be focusing my drawing on that. As you know by now, every single reference poses a different challenge, and every drawing will be different. So let's jump right into this one. To start, I'll open a new canvas. Since this illustration is for my own practice, I don't think about the size of the canvas too much and just choose screen size. I'll make sure to have my favorite sketching brush, which in this case is the gesture pencil from my Feels Like Pencil for Procreate brushes. And I stare at my reference to see where I will start my drawing. Like I said before, one of the reasons I chose this reference was that I found the movement in it very captivating. So I decided to start with the line of action. Remember to take your time and practice the line before you do it. Once I have the line, I realized that it was a bit too high on the page. And since I'm working on my iPad, I can just choose to move this line wherever I want it on my canvas. Once I have this line, the second thing that caught my attention was his little cute face. So I draw a circle for that. Using quick lines, I start to determine the shape of the head. Notice how light I work when I'm just starting an illustration. I take the angle from the head to the body to see where the top of the body is. Once I have that, I draw an oval for the body. With quick lines, I try to capture the rhythm I see in the back of the body and in the ears. I also capture the line of action of the tail. And I measure from the head to the tail to see where the tail ends. Now, this is a bad habit I got from drawing mainly digitally. Turns out that my drawing is too big for the canvas I have. If I were drawing on paper, I would have to start all over again. If you're working on paper, a good tip is to mark the area that your drawing will have before you start to draw anything. And once you start, keep the drawing confined to the space you allocated for it. This will prevent what just happened to me from happening to you. But since I'm drawing on my iPad, I can just continue to build my bad habit by simply using the selection tool and changing the size of my sketch. So I'll do that. Once I have my sketch on the size I want it to be, I continue to capture the rhythm I see in the tail. I make an oval for the back leg and a line of action for the tree that the squirrel is sitting on. My reference image is in front of me, so I use my Apple Pencil to measure the angle from the snout to the tree branch to find where it should end. And I continue to move my sketch around until it matches my reference. Now that I have the basic structure of my drawing in place, I'll start to work just a little more detailed. I start marking where the eye is with a small circle, and continue to find the shapes and angles I see in the face. To start working on that front leg, draw a circle for the shoulder, and capture the angles in the forearm. With quick and soft lines, I keep defining the shapes I see in the reference. You can start to slowly define the mouth, nose, and the eye. This is still part of the messy process of finding the drawing, so the lines are still fairly light and messy. Another thing that inspired me to choose this reference was the rhythm. So I make sure to pay close attention to the rhythm in the reference and try to capture it. Just like this, I continue to build my sketch, looking constantly back and forward between my drawing and the reference. At this point, I start to define some basic values, so I look at the shapes in the shadows and very lightly make them darker in my drawing. At this point, I would like to move on to the next level of details. So I zoom in on the face and start to define it more. I darken the shapes I see in the values and the features of the face. Now that I have that, I use my knitter eraser to clean up my sketch a bit. I really wanted to make sure that I captured the rhythm in the reference. So I made sure to recheck and clean up the lines so that the rhythm shows. The rhythm is the connection between the lines, so I make a big line that connects the chest, the belly, and the tail to accentuate that rhythm. And I continue to define my sketch by adding more values. I also noticed that the back was a bit too low, so I erased that line and I drew a new back. And I keep on measuring and rechecking my reference to make sure that my sketch is looking good and that I've captured my reference correctly. Once again, I want you to notice how messy my sketch is. It's important to keep things messy until you're certain of your sketch, and you can move on to a more finished illustration. At this point, I decided to make a new layer to start and cleaning up the sketch a little bit. But I'm still not thinking about the finished drawing. There's something that doesn't feel quite right about my sketch, so I keep exploring it for a bit. For now, I haven't been able to put my finger on it, but later in the video, you'll see that I finally get there. This is also a really good thing for you to notice. I'm not 100% happy with my sketch at the moment, but I'm not giving up on it. I keep on looking to and from my reference to continue to improve it. On this new layer, I work on defining a bit more some of the features on the face, and I make sure to keep my focus on the rhythm. After a few moments, I felt that I had to explore something different. So I merge all the layers and I go to my liquify tool. This will allow me to push the pixels around and fix some parts of my sketch. I continue defining my sketch by finding the shapes in the shadows. And little by little, I start to darken and darken my lines. I spent some time adding the highlights I see on the eye. My goal for this drawing is to create an illustration that is full of rhythm, so I make sure to keep that in mind with every line I make. Since my sketch is a bit more defined, I start to add all the different values I see. I'm still not thinking about the texture and the fur. I'm just making sure that I know what value goes where before I move on to details like that. Notice that I add the values very slowly, and I make sure to build them up little by little, making sure that there are enough different values in my sketch to make it look more realistic. With the smudge tool and my uniform blend brush, I go ahead and I blend all of these values to smoothen the sketch. And I'll continue to build up the values. Slowly but surely, I keep on adding information to my sketch, like the legs, claws, and the texture on the tree branch. I move on to the different values on the tail. I'm still keeping everything messy and loose. Now that I have most of the values in place, I'll go ahead and smoothen everything with the smudge tool. I'll also use the eraser on a small size to start to add some of the fur texture. I do this very lightly and I focus on keeping everything pretty messy and loose. I keep on building the texture very slowly with my brush. And I'll keep on switching between my tools to add texture with the brush or the eraser and to smoothing everything with the smudge tool. At this point, I feel it's time to move on to a more finished drawing. So I changed the color of the background and I use a medium tone to add a base to the squirrel. Once I'm finished with this, there was still something that I felt was off with my drawing. At this point, I've been working on this sketch for around an hour, and I just wasn't able to put my finger on what was bothering me. So I decided to take a break. I went for a short walk, and I decided to clear my mind. When I came back with a fresh set of eyes, I spent some time looking at my drawing and comparing it to the reference. And the thing that felt off was immediately clear to me. This is the power of taking a break when you feel a drawing isn't working out the way you want it to. I noticed that the neck was way too short in comparison to the reference. Plus, I felt that there was some rhythm on the reference that I just hadn't been able to capture. So I made a new layer on top and I worked on defining the rhythm a bit more. I took the selection tool to select the head and move it up. With the smudge tool, I softened the edges of the selection and defined the neck area once again. I also noticed that I had to fix the back a bit. Since I decided to take a step back in my drawing, I deleted the layer where I had the base color and continued to focus on my sketch for now, until I'm happy with how it looks and I can move on to adding values. I recheck everything and work on the proportions of everything again with the liquify tool. And I continue to keep adding the values of my sketch, little by little. Now, I finally reach a point where I'm happy with my sketch. So I take a medium tone and I add a new layer with a base color underneath the lines. I tried to add this base color using long and fluid lines to make sure that the rhythm of the reference is still showing in my drawing. On a new layer and with a darker value, I continue to build up my shadows. I make sure to look at my reference constantly to add the differences in value I see. And I'm still not focused on the texture of the fur. For now, I'm just placing the values. I continue to pay close attention to my reference and adding the different values where I see them. I'm taking my time to build a strong foundation before I start to think about the textures and the fur. I spent some time cleaning the features on the face a bit, but still not working super detailed or anything, just building my drawing very slowly. With a lighter value, I work on a few highlights I see. start to add values using quick short lines to begin working on the fur texture. Again, little by little. I want the face to be the focus point of my drawing, so this will be the most rendered part of my illustration. I've learned that with fur, less is more. So I'm not doing this texture for every single part of the squirrel. I'm just adding these textures on a few areas. This will help with the realism. I continue to add a few lines to suggest fur on a few spots of my drawing. I go to the layer where the base color is, and using the smudge tool, I soften the edges so you don't see a hard line. This will also help with the realism of your artwork. And I keep on adding the values slowly. I spent some time to define the face a bit more. I feel like my style of realistic rendering is all about contrast. I'll focus on adding lots of details to the part that I want to be the main focus point, which in this case is the face of the squirrel. And the rest of the illustration will be less and less rendered the further it gets from the focus point. I keep on building my illustration like this, adding the different values where I see them on the reference. With a bigger, soft brush and a darker value, I add darker shadows on a new layer. I'm still not spending loads of time on the details, but I'm still focusing my energy on defining the different values, making sure that my drawing is looking more and more three-dimensional. With a sharper, smaller brush, I start to add more of the fur texture to the body of the squirrel. In this case, I'm using my raw pencil brush. At this point, I feel happy with the values and how it's looking, so I feel comfortable to start thinking more about the details. I choose a darker value than anything I've used on this drawing so far, and I start to define the eye. Paying close attention to my reference, I add darker values where I see them on the eye. I also add some more details to the face with this value. I do the same for the ears and the cheeks. I continue to focus on the details I see on the face and slowly work them in. With the darkest value, I continue to define the mouth. I believe that highlights, when used correctly, bring life to your drawing as nothing else can. So I spend time looking at the reference and copying the shapes I see on the highlight of the eye. With the same lighter tone, I add some more details to the face. I also use some quick lines to add more highlights around the face. I'll start defining the ears a bit more, adding and adding values, making sure I build up my drawing slowly and that I pay attention to the reference in front of me. With a lighter tone, I add some of the loose hairs and highlights to make him look more and more fluffy. At this point, I decided it's time to really bring in the detail. So I choose a detail brush. In this case, I'm using the 0.3 mechanical pencil brush. With this brush in a small size, I start to add the whiskers. For this, I'm drawing really quick and confident lines. I also add some little hairs and details all around the face. I continue to add these little hairs everywhere I see them in my reference. And since I took the time to build a strong foundation of values underneath, these little hairs really help with the texture of the fur. I start to add the different values I see in the background with a soft brush. I'm happy with how the background is looking for now, so I'll go back to the face. And using the same detailed brush as before, I'll add darker whiskers and details all around the face. I add a few of these detail hairs all over the body as well. But I make sure to not over-render my drawing. Again, this is just my current style of drawing. It doesn't mean that it's the right way or anything. This is just the way I found that I enjoy drawing realism the most. I invite you to try it as well. I continue to add a few details all around, but I make sure to keep the face the most detailed part. With a soft brush, I add some values to the body to unify the fur. And I go back to a detail brush to add shadows to the ear. I lower the opacity of this layer and continue to work on my illustration. I'm happy with how everything is looking so far, so I'll start to work on the little paws and the tree branch. Since this area is away from my focus point, I'll render it much less than the face. I'll still add enough details to suggest the fingers, claws, and everything, but I want to keep it much less detailed than the focus point. I notice that I need some areas to be darker, so I make a new layer, set it to multiply, and I add some more shadows with a softer brush and a darker value. I play with the opacity of this layer until I'm happy with how it looks, and I move on to the final details. For this, I'll spend some time with my detail brush to add more of that fur texture all over. I continue to add lighter values where I see them in my reference. Once I'm happy with how everything is looking, I would like to add some texture to the background. So I choose a brush that allows me to do that. And I work on adding more interest to the background of my illustration. I want to add more of the cute whiskers, so I go back to my detail brush and I work on making him look a bit fluffier. I keep on adding these final details until I'm happy with how my illustration is looking. And just like that, I'm done with this drawing. You can see that I keep the interest of my illustration on the rhythm and how one line flows into the next. I did this because that's what captured my attention with this particular reference. This might be different for you. Maybe you noticed something different than me, and that's okay, that's perfectly fine. The idea is that you find your own way to use all the tools you've learned in this course. Keep practicing, and if you drew something or followed along, make sure to share your illustration with the rest of the class in the Design Cuts Community Hub. See you in another one.